500 million people with readily available access to the internet. An extraordinary figure. Almost 500 million television sets. Nearing 100 million cars and almost 20 million new cars on the road every year. So in perhaps 7 to 8 years, they will be the most car populous country in the world, overtaking the US. That would probably mean 400 million tyres, had it not been for the fact that some of the cars look like that. So what do Chinese consumers think of Western brands? Well, some Western brands do particularly well. Evidence certainly suggests that, but it's not without localising their product. You could go into a McDonald's here and you probably struggle to find a prosperity value meal with a prosperity chicken burger or prosperity beef burger, seaweed wedges and mandarin orange tea. But a very good example of how even a world leader with the clout and the advertising dollar, you would think, to do things their way, accommodated the local market ahead of their own requirements. I've seen a lot of Australian people go to China with the attitude that they're going to teach the Chinese how to drink wine, and invariably they come back disappointed. And it's not because the Chinese don't get it, it's just simply they're at a different stage of their wine appreciation than we are. It's as simple as that. You know, think back to showing my age. As a young lad, I remember my parents over Christmas would drink cold duck. I don't know if any of you remember that product, but it was a carbonated sort of sweet, sparkling, you know what I mean. It's now not what anyone would call high-end wine, but obviously our tastes have become a lot more sophisticated over the last 20, 25 years, and as will the Chinese. So keep in mind, we are looking to adjust to their tastes in exactly the same way that someone like McDonald's had to succeed in the China market. So how well do they like imported high-end products? Because you know that perception that everything's got to be cheap is not necessarily right. It depends where in China you're going. Well, let's start with someone like Louis Vuitton. Can you imagine at an average retail price of $4,000 for a Louis Vuitton handbag, more than 20% of their global sales are from Hong Kong and China? Extraordinary, extraordinary. Of course, about 90% of the fakes are also from China, but it's not the Chinese that buy them, it's us. How about wine? Well, the Chinese wine market is the fastest growing wine market in the world, but the ceiling is really high. 1.5, or the potential ceiling, 1.5 billion bottles consumed last year, 1.5 billion bottles of wine. Now that is both imported and locally produced wine, 1.5 billion bottles. Chinese are also big collectors of wine. In fact, premium wines stored in London. And we're talking a total of about 1 million cases of premium wine stored in London. Around 40% of that wine is owned by Chinese and Hong Kong investors.
How do they drink it?
They sit back and wait for it to accumulate, improve in price, and enjoy it maybe when one of their kids gets married, something like that, you know. There's nothing like the status symbol of having a really high-end bottle of wine on the middle of your table if you're hosting a banquet or something like that.
With the negotiating?
Beg your pardon?
With the negotiating?
Can be. Can be. So who are these wealthy Chinese people? Well, officially Chinese is number 2 in terms of billionaires and millionaires, but number 2 to the US. The consensus is probably that they're number 1 because a lot of people just don't admit how much money they got in China, believe it or not. There are 100 million what they call first class in China. And those people have the ability to buy pretty much what they want when they want to. They are the kind of people that you are looking to sell your products to if you have something a little unique, a little boutique, a little high-end. Middle class is the one that gets most people's attention, of course, because there are around 360 million of them. And, you know, once again, that's another figure that's a bit rubbery. That could have been right yesterday and it's wrong tomorrow. This, when you have that many people, things change pretty rapidly. Once again, they are very interested in foreign brands, foreign products, and high-quality goods and services. So there is no doubt that China can afford the kind of quality that Australia can provide. There is no doubt that they want it either. So could it possibly be that simple? All you've got to do is take some beautiful South Australian wine or other South Australian produce into the China market and you'll make a fortune? Unfortunately, it's not that simple. Long-term success, at least in my experience, in the China market is not possible unless you have what is the fundamental underpinning secret to doing business in China, which is relationship building, or what the Chinese call guanxi. This essentially brings you closer to the business person that you ultimately want to do business with. It's all about relationships. Max mentioned it, and I 100% wholeheartedly agree with everything he said about it. You can do short-term business in China. I went to a seminar recently where one of the speakers made mention of the fact that he thought this relationship thing in China was quite overrated. And if you were a typical Aussie guy and just told it like it was, you'd be fine. You'd do business, and he'd done business there. He also went on to say that the Chinese really want to pay next to nothing for your products, and it's very hard to get repeat orders. So I think he answered the question himself. Without relationships, long-term business is really impossible. Within minutes of meeting you, a Chinese business person is beginning the process of assessing the benefit and the advantages of knowing you. They're assessing your potential for what they call guanxi. Now, guanxi doesn't just mean face-to-face meetings, because a lot of Australian business people I've met, the first thing they say, oh, you've got to meet people face-to-face. Now, there are certain kind of face-to-face meetings. There's the right kind and there's the wrong kind. I know of a business that had been doing business in China for around 10 years, no names. They had what they felt was an excellent relationship with a supplier. They'd been going up there, they'd been having the dinners, they'd been going on, doing the buying trip, visiting the factory, doing everything that they thought that was integral to building that right kind of relationship in China. They weren't expanding their network, and unfortunately for them, the most important thing in that relationship between them and the supplier was the business. That was the most important thing. As a result, they arrived in mid-2008 to find that because of a change in labour laws in China, or more to the point, enforcing of certain labour laws in China, their factory no longer wanted to do business with them. Simple as that. Now, you would wonder what would make a Chinese factory similarly decide not to want to do business with you. Well, very, very simply, the rule that employees in certain kinds of China factories who had at least 10 years service needed to be paid at least a month's wages for any severance meant that numerous thousands of Chinese factories closed up just before the deadline and reopened about a week later at a fraction of their original size. The guy his supplier no longer had the capacity he had, so some of his customers had to go. The ones that didn't have the right kind of relationship left, so suddenly you're in a position where you're having these face-to-face meetings, you think you're doing things the right way, and now you don't have a supplier anymore. Costs them a lot of money. Face-to-face meetings are important. There is no doubt about it. Face-to-face meetings are critical, but they need to be the right kind of face-to-face meetings, building the right kind of relationship. So what is this guanxi? Guanxi is all about your network. It's about who you know. It's about your degrees of influence. It's about your connections. And especially, it's about how useful you are, at least perceptively, to the network of the people that you want to do business with. Short-term success without this guanxi is possible. As I said, you can do it. You know, you could go to China tomorrow and within a week get an order for a container full of wine. You won't be happy with the price you're getting though. Definitely not. If you want the good price, if you want favourable terms that suit everybody, especially you need to have that right kind of relationship. That is the only way to have long-term success in China. Whether you're buying from China, selling to China, or just negotiating with China on investment or at some other level, you need to have that relationship. So, what is the guanxi business model and how does it compare to the normal business model that we are more familiar with? First of all, to give you a snapshot so you can compare, the regular business model is that you have a company and a client. A business transaction takes place and quite often in that environment a relationship develops. As a result of that relationship, perhaps a little bit more business is done, and then luckily, if you're lucky, over time the two companies, the company and the client, maybe even grow a little bit closer together. The Chinese or the guanxi business model starts off very similar. You have a company and a client, but the key difference is next. It is the relationship that comes first. Always the relationship that comes first. As a result of that relationship, business then becomes possible. It is the relationship that makes business possible, not the other way around. The two work well together, hand in hand. And bit by bit, the company and the client, as they get to know each other and come close together, they don't only draw closer together, they almost begin to rely on each other for things beyond just the business, almost fit together like a hand in a glove. As you can see, I pressed the wrong button actually. There you go. As you can see, it's a nice snug fit. Now, in the Western business model, a competitor comes along, and because he sees that at the very beginning of this relationship is business. It's a business transaction that is the single most important thing. All he's got to do is offer a cheaper price or different trading terms or a slightly unique product, and he just fits right in. As a result, it's very easy for the company to lose a client. The guanxi business model addresses a competitor somewhat differently, because whichever way the competitor tries to approach the relationship and the company and the company and the client relationship, the relationship is always in the way. And when you have a look at them side by side, the competitor just doesn't quite fit. Now, that is the kind of relationship that you can build if you build a guanxi relationship from the beginning, from the ground up, and expand that relationship to make the relationship about more than just the business you are doing. It's the kind of relationship that takes time to develop, but it's something that will take the focus off price. And South Australian businesses, particularly with our dollar the way it is at the moment, you know, we need all the help we can get to take the focus off price if you're exporting. If you're importing, well then, you know, happy days. But if you are exporting, we need to take the focus off price. Guanxi relationships are one very, very important way to do it. So very clearly, in the guanxi business model, the relationship always comes first. Without guanxi and the right kind of relationship, any business that does develop is pretty much accidental. And as a result, it's very fragile and it can disappear, just like in the example I gave you, very, very quickly.